Okay, my friends, you got to put your thinking caps on today. It's a little bit different, a little bit harder, but not that hard. If when we think about what we're going to be doing, it's really the same thing we did with fractions, just now we're doing it with decimals. Okay, so we're going to use what we know about fractions to help us solve these today. So pay really closest attention to this lesson. It says we're going to use the understanding of fraction equivalence. Okay, so we got to think about fractions to investigate decimal numbers on a place value chart expressed in different units. That's kind of confusing, but here's what I want us to do. Okay, first one says write the fraction below as a decimal. 250 hundredths. Okay, what is 250 hundredths? Well, first of all, what do you notice about this fraction? It's improper. Okay, so we can't do that. We've got to break it down into hundredths. So, into whole numbers, I mean. So I have 100 hundredths, we're decomposing, and 100 hundredths would be 200, and then I have 50 hundredths more. All right, now that's going to be a little bit easier to write. So 1, 2, and 50 hundredths is what that's worth. So we can write that as a decimal now, 2 and 50 hundredths. So today we're going to do a lot of decomposing, a lot of breaking down of numbers to help us understand how to write it better. So hopefully you remember how we decompose. The good thing about using decimals is we're only going to decompose into tens and hundreds. So that's pretty easy because it's the tenths and the hundredths place. All right, so let's get started with some more problems today. This one wants to know, if I have 2 ones, how many tenths do I have? All right, so think what we know about this. I want you to think about this in fractions. If I have 2 ones, then I have a 10 tenths, and I have 10 tenths more. There's 1, there's 2. Okay, so 2 ones, how many tenths do I have altogether? I have 10, 20 tenths. Okay, so if we think about, if we write 2 ones, it looks like that, right? If we just took the decimal out, it looks like a 20, doesn't it? Okay, but that's kind of confusing. I don't want you to confuse you with that. Just decompose the ones into tenths or hundredths every time, and it'll help you get the answer. You'll see what I mean. 2 tenths is how many hundredths? 2 tenths is how many hundredths? So what are we going to do here? What does 2 tenths look like? It looks like 0.2, or it looks like 2 tenths. It's a fraction. So if we want to know how many hundredths it is, it's kind of like finding an equivalent fraction, isn't it? 2 tenths is how many hundredths? This is what you're doing in your extra social studies this week. Now you know why we're doing it, to get a hang of this better. So we're doing 10 times 10 is 100. 2 times 10 would be 20. So 2 tenths would be 20 hundredths. Okay, so think about this. 2 tenths looks like that. If I add the 0 after it, it looks like 20 hundredths, doesn't it? Okay, moving on. 1 and 3 tenths is how many tenths? Well, how many tenths is 1? It's 10 tenths, right? So if I have 10 tenths for 1, and then I have 3 tenths more, what's 10 plus 3? It would be 13 tenths altogether, right? So we could write 3 tenths like this. 10 tenths plus 3 tenths would be 13 tenths. Don't put 13 10 tenths. Don't put like that, 13 over 10. We don't have 13 10 tenths. You have 13 tenths. So make sure you write it like I did there. Okay, 2 tenths, 3 hundredths is how many hundredths? 2/10, 3/100ths. Okay, so let's break this down. 10/10 and 10/10 makes, no. Mr. Helton. 2/10 is 1/10 and 1/10. And then you have 3/100ths. What do you think about this? We've got to write these fractions to figure it out, don't we? Mr. Helton's getting confused himself. I'm going to write over here where I have a little more room. I have 2/10, and I want to know how many hundredths that makes. Okay? So we got to do this converting. 10 times 10 is 100. 2 times 10 is 20. So 2/10, hey, we just figured that out a minute ago, didn't we? 2/10 is 20 hundredths. So 2/10 is 20 hundredths. So if I have 20 hundredths and then I have 3 hundredths more, what's 20 plus 3? Altogether, I have 23 hundredths. 23 hundredths. Okay, moving on. Decompose them. To represent each number as tenths. 1 is how many tenths? Well, 1 would be 10/10, right? 10/10 is the same as 1, so 1 is 10/10. 2, to get 2, we'd have a 10/10 and 10/10 more. So how many tenths is 2? I've got 10, 20. 2 is 20/10. 1 and 7/10. Okay, 1 would be 10/10, and 7/10 looks like this. So what's 10/10 and 7/10 more? That would be 17/10, wouldn't it? See, I just took the 1 and made it 10/10, and the 7 and made it 7/10, because that's what it is. 0.7 is 7/10. Okay, how many tenths is 2 and 9/10? Well, 2 would be 10/10 and 10/10. And then 9/10 would be 9/10. So let's look at these together. 10 plus 10 is 20, plus 9, 29/10. See what we're doing? We're just using decomposing and turning them into fractions to help us understand what the answer is. It's a little confusing. We got lots of examples to do. So let's do some more. Here come the police. I hear that siren outside. They're coming to arrest us because this is so hard. All right, not really. All right, I have 10 and 7/10. Woo! How many tenths is that? So to do 10, I'm going to have to do 10/10, 10/10, 10/10. I'm going to have to do 10/10. 10/10, 10/10. Some of you already know what the answer is going to be. It's like 10 times 10, right? 10/10, 10/10. So there are 10 10/10 to equal 10. Remember, because 10/10 equals 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. If I add all those together, I get 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 tenths plus 7/10. What would be 100 tenths plus 7/10? It's going to be 107/10. That was a fun one. 20? What? I don't want to write 10/10 20 times. Well, just think 20 times 10. What would that be? Because we would have 20 tens, wouldn't we? That would be 200 tenths. And then we have 9 tenths more. So what's 200 plus 9? We have 209 tenths. Oh boy, crazy, crazy. So if you don't want to write 10 tenths 20 times, just do 20 times 10 and put that over 10, okay? Just do 20 times 10 tenths. It would be 200 tenths. Number 4, decompose them to represent them as hundredths. So this time we're going to do the exact same thing, but we're not going to make tenths. We're going to make hundredths. So if I want to make 1, then how many hundreds do I have to have? I have to have 100 hundredths. Same number on top and bottom equals 1, right? So 1 is 100 hundredths. 2. How much is 2? Well, then I'm going to have 100 hundredths and 100 hundredths. There's 1, there's 2. 100 plus 100 is 200. So 2 is 200 hundredths. 1.7, 1 and 7 hundredths, excuse me, that's going to be 100 100ths. There's 1, but this is 7/10. That's a problem, isn't it? So I've got to turn 7/10 into 100ths to see how many hundredths 7/10 is. Well, 10 times 10 is 100. 7 times 10 is 70. The multiplication is easy on this. So I have 100 100ths plus 70 hundredths. So I have 170 hundredths. This one, 2 and 9/10. That's 100 100ths. 100 100ths. Then I've got to figure out how many hundredths 9/10 is. As you get used to this, you're not going to have to even write this out. You just know you're going to add a 0 to both top and bottom because you're multiplying times 10. 9/10 is 90 100ths. So I have 100 100ths and another 100. So there's 200 hundredths. 200 plus 90 is 290 hundredths. Moving ahead. We have so many examples to work today. You're going to want to watch them all, though, so you get the hang of this. Still decomposing. Now we have 10. Whew. So if I have 10, do I want to write 100 hundredths 10 times? I don't want to write 100 hundredths 10 times. I can just multiply it times 10. So remember when we did this, we only multiply the 10 times the top. So what's 10 times 100? That would be 1,000 hundredths. So 10 is 1,000 hundredths. Okay, and then I have 7/10. Well, that's not easy. That's not easy either. Not right either. So we got to change 7/10 into hundredths. Remember, we just added 0 to both. 7/10 is 70 hundredths. So I have 1,000 hundredths plus 70 hundredths is 1,070 hundredths. Okay, I have 20 and 9/10 is how many hundredths? Okay, so 20 is, we can do 20, 100 100ths. Do you want to write 100 100ths 20 times? No. So we're just going to multiply it times 20. 20 times 100 100ths would be 2,000 100ths. And then we have 9/10, which we know is 90 100ths. So 2,000 plus 90 would be 2,090 hundredths. Number 5, convert 2 and 1/10 to a mixed number, then decompose into tenths and hundredths. Oh boy. So 2 and 1/10 looks like this. 2 and 1/10. Now this just doesn't mean how many tenths we say 1. No, it means how many tenths is 2 and 1/10. Okay, well we're going to decompose 2 and 1/10. 2 would be 10 tenths and 10 tenths, right? So that's 10 20 tenths plus 1/10 more would be 21 tenths. How many hundredths is 2 and 1/10? Well, we're going to decompose it. 100 100ths. 100 100ths would be 2. So 100 200 and I can't do 1/10. I got to change that. That's going to be 10 hundredths multiplied by 10. So 210 hundredths. Whew. I think on your homework today, you can just put 21 for 10 instead of putting 21 tenths and 210 instead of putting 210 hundredths, if you'd like to skip that part. Okay, we're doing the same thing on this one. Make 4 and 2/10 a mixed number and decompose into tenths and hundredths. 4 and 2/10 looks like 4 and 2/10. How many tenths? Okay, we're going to take 4 and 2/10. We're going to break the 4 into 4 10/10. Some of you might be able to do that in your head. It's going to be 40 tenths, and then we have 2 tenths more. So altogether we have 42 tenths. Okay. How many hundredths is that? Okay. We're going to take 4 and 2/10. We're going to make it hundredths. Well, you know what it is. It's going to be 100 100ths, 100 100ths, 100 100ths, 100 100ths, and 2/10. We've got to change it to 100ths. It's going to be 20 100ths times 10 times 10. So I have 100, 200, 300, 400, and 20 hundredths. Moving ahead, 8 and 4/10 is a mixed number. 8 and 4/10. Decompose it into tenths and hundredths. 8 is going to be 10 tenths 8 times, right? If we broke it down, we would have to do 10 tenths 8 times. And how many tenths would that be? 10 times 8 would be 80 tenths. And then if I have 4 tenths more, altogether I would have 84 tenths. How many hundredths would that be? 8. What was the number? 8 and 4/10. Okay. So if I wrote this as hundredths, I'd have to write 100 100ths 8 times. What's 8 times 100? I'd have 800 hundredths. And then 4/10, I'm going to need to make that hundredths. That would be 40 hundredths. So I'm going to have 800 hundredths plus 40 hundredths would be 840 hundredths. 10 and 2/10 is a mixed number. 10 and 2/10. How many tenths? All right, so if I took 10 to make tenths, I would have to do 10 tenths 10 times to make 10. So that would be 10 times 10, which would be 100 tenths to make 10. And then I have 2 tenths more. So how many tenths do I have altogether? 102 tenths. How many hundredths is that? So I'm going to take that same 10. If I was to decompose it, I would have to do 100 100ths 10 times to make 10. What's 10 times 100? It would be 1,000 100ths. And then I have 2 tenths more, but I'm going to have to make that 2 tenths hundredths. So 10 times 10, it's going to be 20 hundredths. So I have 1,000 hundredths plus 20 hundredths is 1,020 hundredths. Okay, 75 and 5/10 is a mixed number. It looks like 75 and 5/10. 75 and 5/10. How many tenths is that? 75 and 5/10. So if I wanted to do 75 tenths, I would have to do, as ones, I'd have to do 10 tenths, 10 tenths, 10 tenths, 10 tenths. I'd have to do that 75 times, or I can just do 75 times 10 is going to be what? It's going to be 750 tenths. And then I have 5 tenths more. It's right here. So 750 tenths plus 5 tenths is 755 tenths. How many hundredths? Okay, I'm going to take 75. If I was to write 100 100ths 75 times, I would have to do that to get 75, or I could just do 75 times 100, which is 7,500 hundredths. And then I have 5 tenths more, but we got to make that 5 tenths hundredths. So it's going to be 50 hundredths. So I'm going to add 750 hundredths plus 50 hundredths would be, 7,500 hundredths plus 50 hundredths would be 7,550 hundredths. Now I want you to see a pattern on these last few we did. Let's see if you can see it. 4 and 2 tenths. Tenths would be 42 tenths. 420 hundredths. We just added a 0. Okay. 8 and 4 tenths would be 84 tenths. 840 hundredths. We just added a 0. 10 and 2 tenths would be 102 tenths. Add a 0. 1,020 hundredths. How many tenths? 755. Add a 0. 7,550. It's moving on the place value chart from one place to the next. Adding a 0 is what we're doing. I like decomposing it, though, to understand why we got that. Okay, so there's a bunch of examples for today's assignment. I'm going to let you go get started on that thing. Talk to you later.